In my adulthood, most black women in my surrounding were proud of their kingly crown, but the reality is majority of them outside of my immediate milieu suffer from an embedded sense of self-hate, and thereby were ingeniously convinced that straightened hair was more fitting for everyday living. This strange notion that plagued the minds of so many have revealed to me that natural hair was a serious issue of racial pride. For that reason, this video came about as a conscientious result, and thus will serve as a catalyst to re-innovate, to encourage them, to recultivate their pride in order to allow them to remember the unique qualities and beauty in their own natural hair, which will therefore give them the courage to reclaim their identity and teach them that love for self and kind is ideal. Welcome to Back to the Basics, where you learn facts, hope you embrace it. Watch, like, share, bring in awareness. Watch, like, share, bring in awareness. I'm fearless. Welcome to Back to the Basics, where you learn facts, hope you embrace it. Watch, like, share, bring in awareness. Watch, like, share, bring in. The misconception of beauty is primarily where the problem lies. For true beauty has inner and outer qualities. But let's be honest, many women focus more so on their outer beauty. For time immemorial, they have been beautifying themselves because they know their physical appearance is the first thing that others notice about them. Physical appearance is important, and most women are very sensitive to this reality. Therefore, they spare no effort to enhance it, whether it's through dress, makeup, and most importantly, their hair. Many unfortunately are completely unaware to the fact that one can perceive many other things besides beauty from the mere physical appearance. You can tell what class of people they are, what their personalities may be like, and the quantity and quality of intellect they may or may not possess. Yes, intellect. A person's physical appearance tells a lot about their intelligence. It gives the onlooker a brief assessment of one's perception of themselves. It confirms how they view themselves from the inside looking outward. A common statement said is, "A woman's hair is her crown and glory." This idea, however, is subjective because choosing between relaxed or natural hair is not a settled matter for most black women. You notice because, according to industry statistics, they make up about 65% of so-called hair care revenue on products that are aimed to alter their hair texture. And of course, one cannot deny the usual perception that more than half of them relax their hair, which reveals that the greater population of them are not comfortable with their natural hair. They don't mean to, but in the course of their daily lives, they often neglect their history and take their identity for granted. They fail to realize that identity is one's essential self that links them to a culture, a place of belonging. Most have become so distant from whom and what they truly are that it can be a nerve-wracking ordeal when conversing about going natural. They often fail to realize that the most unique quality on their body is their hair. And although this may sound strange, it is an ancient scientific fact that all others were grafted from animals, such as primates, to have fur as opposed to natural hair. The reason for this misconception is the daily programming by way of the TV, cinema, and music through foreign tones and frequencies that can and has potentially altered one's perception. Falling short of societal expectations call these women's femininity into question. For a woman can disguise her figure flaws with fabric, but when she fails to achieve what she perceives to be beautiful hair, her weakness is exposed to all passerbys. Now, unless you've suffered firsthand, it may be difficult for you to understand just how traumatic the shame of perceived imperfection can be and how it can paralyze the suffered individual into inaction. I've seen and hear personally how these women suffer for their lack of self-knowledge, denying the eminent truth of self-hatred that is neither disguised but oftentimes disregarded. As an avid student of life who studies human nature, I was able to develop a deep understanding of human psyche. I study their faces and body language daily. I can often tell a lot from them: who is happy, who is not, who has inner peace, who does not. And most importantly, I've been able to learn which attitudes are most likely to achieve a positive result when it comes to feeling as good as they naturally look, and which are counterproductive. Thinking back, as an adolescent, I can honestly say that I too thought that straightened hair was normal for black women. This idea has been imprinted in my mind as long as I could remember. It was practically all that I knew. It was not until my adulthood I was sparked with divine insight, which opened my eyes to a world that always existed, yet I seldom seen. This revelation motivated me to observe black men, but more particularly, the progenitors of our physical existence, that is, the black woman. I then took an anthropological approach and began my ethnographic research as a participating observer. For you learn far more about others if you observe what he or she does and not just rely on what they say. After careful observation, I came to the conclusion that many of them suffer from a severe case of inferiority complexity. This difficulty has not only led them to alter their hair texture, but when confronted about it, their reasoning is often empty of substance. I honestly think that the women who damage their hair beyond recognition have yet to discover this anomaly for themselves. They have been so well conditioned to neglect their racial uniqueness that it almost seems innate. The discovery of this inherent deception prepared me to shoot this video, describing the emotions, the fear of recognition, and the neglect of woolly hair. Shockingly, however, most black women I've interviewed did not relate to such an experience. Most of them couldn't even fathom the idea of the obvious disregard they have for their own hair texture. For every 3 to 4 weeks, they are in a beauty salon retouching a new growth, washing and setting, blow drying, restyling, or just simply adding pieces of human or synthetic fur to their tresses and calling it their own, primarily because they bought it. Now, I cannot fault them entirely because I know that they have been stripped of their culture and have thus become complacent with the prevailing standards of beauty. Through my experience, I have found that whenever the topic of woolly hair is addressed, it is often accompanied by criticism, intense scrutiny, mild curiosity, and denial. Sensitivity, however, does not penetrate this subject matter. Most of them catch a bad case of social amnesia at these moments, yet they all notice when a significant amount of new growth is present and then malicious remarks are bestowed upon it. Right then, I knew that the moment that they admit to no one but themselves that they in fact have a problem with their own natural hair, then there's perhaps room for a beauty resolution. Although not often admitted, most of these women feel at odds with the prevailing standards of beauty. The reason being is there aren't enough natural, beautiful, Nubian, black women images for them to role model. This form of psychology starts from a very young age, the malleable stage in which one can be molded while innocent to the reality that they have conformed in every way, shape, and form to how the media, books, and magazines they've read, TV programs they've watched, and the regular conversation that swirls around them daily that tells them how to look has affected them greatly. The discovery of this harsh reality can be devastating, especially when they have become overwhelmingly preoccupied with fitting in. It seems being different deviates from social norm. Nevertheless, I came to appreciate that with the right knowledge, being different could also be an advantage. Consider the words abnormal and extraordinary. Both words mean that you're not normal and that you are out of the ordinary or different. But how much more empowering is it to view yourself as extraordinary as opposed to abnormal? Auspiciously, the return of our spiritual science and the divine love from our descendants, whom we refer to as Parental, I was made conscious of the extent of the problem my people face daily about their hair. All is mental, and in the degree that each realizes this reality, so will they rise and overstand the principle of accepting self and kind. Know that you can only cope successfully with being yourself if you've already accepted being different as a positive attribute. This means redefining your concept of beauty, for true beauty originates in the soul and it expresses itself through the body. Inner beauty is a quality that we all possess. You merely have to recognize it, then build it up, rather than focusing on what you think you lack physically. You have to build on your weaknesses by strengthening your mind. I saw what beautiful women could accomplish when they managed to surface their inner beauty, freeing themselves from the opinions of the outside world and revealing that inner beauty that blossoms and shines forth. So, why do black women try so hard to fit in when they were created to stand out? When looking at black women today, you're looking at the embodiment of deities that has been downtrodden, massively oppressed, physically, psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, and genetically. They presently suffer from cultural deprivation and have since acculturated to white supremacist ideologies. This has been the primary motivator, which gave them the incentive without conscious volition to alter their very nature. I refer to it as internalized racial prejudice. You see, for decades, ignorant philosophies have been impressed upon their minds, especially about the texture of their hair and how hard it is to manage. This sort of perverted thinking came from a time of overt racial prejudice and has since descended into the hearts and minds of the masses of people worldwide. The long overlooked question that we must ask each Nubian female is, who taught you these lies? A simple question, yet because of deceptive influences, most would not be able to answer it critically. Many are ignorant to the fact that they are surrounded by manipulated images and have thus inherited a diseased state of mind. It is more than evident that most have long lost the ability to reason soundly, which puts them in degradation as compared to the highest level or the highest standards of nature. They hardly ever realize that they have been indoctrinated with other than their own culture. For this reason, the notion to embrace their own natural beauty is hardly ever conceived. The right knowledge of one's past is vital to self-development in their future. And since Black women have been culturally deprived of this knowledge, they have been lost ever since. This is why when the question is posed to one who has their hair relaxed, "Do you want to be white?" they would indignantly repudiate the assertion saying, "No." And this is because in the conscious sense of answering such a candid question, one becomes increasingly aware to the veracity that they are emulating other races' genetically determined characteristics. Yet, they are reluctant to admit it because it's clearly embarrassing. On the contrary, other women are just oblivious to the passage of time. These few cannot fathom the thought to even challenge the notion with sound argument. They're inclined to think that they have a mind of their own. Therefore, they say things like, "I do what I want to do." But they fail to explain the reason or source of their wants, never taking into consideration that majority of people are more or less the slaves of their habitual environment and manifest very little freedom. Thus, they are easily swayed by the opinions, suggestions, customs, emotions, feelings, moods, and thoughts of the outside world that carries them along without resistance on their part, for they have thoroughly convinced themselves that they are satisfied being a servant of circumstances. Through concentrated effort, Black women have given up their identity for another. Therefore, their minds are also products shaped by another. You know this because they say things like, "Black is beautiful," but when you look at them, their appearance clearly reiterates that they would stay steadfast in the belief that Black in the image of white women is more beautiful. You see, true beauty is almost outlawed as society is taught to seek the fake and discard the real. This sort of conditioning for an indefinite period produces artificial mindsets instead of original. Coming out of this demoralizing state has almost been impossible for them, mainly because too much stress has been put on their physicality and not nearly enough on their mentality. The mind is the medium that moves matter. Therefore, if it is clouded with impurities, then the actions of those individuals will be the same. And on the contrary, if the mind is pure, then the actions of such individuals will also be pure. How often do you hear Black women say things like, "Your natural looks nice, but I can't do it," or "You got the face for it," or "I just can't see myself in it," or "Are you on that Black power stuff?" or "Natural hair is not for me," or "How do you manage that?" These are all insults to the supreme beings in whose image they are in, and such impure thoughts need to be eradicated. It is regrettable that many Black women will feel more comfortable in the public's eye with their hair relaxed, wrapped in hairpins and roller sets and now bonnets, rather than wearing their natural crown, or they will cut their hair low, apply texturizing chemicals, and then ignorantly call it a natural. It is depressing to know that many are engrossed in a false identity to the detriment of their life and mind, where they would sacrifice safety for style and hardly ever be concerned with the repercussion. They fail to see that they have become well assimilated into a system that bombards them with images. Images that tells them that straightening their hair is prerequisite for beauty. And at the same time, they are subjected to conflicting messages because they're made to feel guilty about any beauty regimen that is natural. All of this is due to the fact that the media promotes one standard of beauty as the absolute. Every magazine cover, commercial, and music video reinforces an objectified standard of beauty, which is often Eurocentric and computer enhanced and thus unreal as the ideal. But these women are still compelled to follow this because society tells them to. And sadly, the only way they can strive for this is through unnatural means. It is unfortunate that they have found themselves subjected to societal expectations, and because of their lack of right knowledge, they are largely powerless to seize control of their natural beauty with comfortability. Being destitute of this much needed knowledge of self and kind has blinded them to the reality of their divine DNA. It is an actual fact that woolly hair people is the world's first race, and all other people descended from them. And so, why are you emulating your children? Modern scientists calls it monogenesis, and if you look closely at the word, you can simply see genes of Isis, a black female deity. Monogenesis, according to modern science, is the idea that all humans descended from a single pair of ancestors, and these ancestors are in fact Africans with woolly hair. What you're hearing is a scientific stamp of approval of what the ancient Egyptians have already knew. It stands to the highest reasoning that black people today in their various hues and hair textures are descendants of the original supreme beings we respectfully refer to as Pa-Neteru. Thus, the woollier the hair is, the closer you are to the source of all existence. We have all heard the expression, beauty is in the eyes of the beholder. This basically means that beauty in a person, place, or thing exists merely in the mind which contemplates it. And although the maxim states that beauty is only skin deep, it is also often attached to skin tone, moral judgment, eye color, body type, and hair texture. But really, who defines beauty for black women? The truth is, black men often define it for black women, but white people, being the dominant influencer of this world, often defines it for black people. This will continue until we redefine it for ourselves, for we are as much a part of the solution as we are a part of the problem. Nevertheless, the experimental spirits of the Eurocentric view on beauty has become the overruling factor which convinced so many into believing that light skin complexion is more beautiful than dark skin complexion, and pointed nose and thin lips are more beautiful than broad noses and thick lips, and straight fur is more beautiful than woolly hair. All of which needs to be combated with the facts, because when black women look in the mirror, their reflection does not reflect the status quo of what society deems to be beautiful. Those who have been brain dirtied by this pathology-oriented society have a concept of beauty that makes them lose their very own identity. Such a biased society makes a disorientated black woman choice of what is beautiful limited, while simultaneously seducing black men into desiring women that reflect nothing like into his own women. Look at how society has stripped our women of their natural unique beauty and has them believing that a multicolored face and processed hair is beautiful. It even has her covering her healthy, dark, and lovely brown eyes with recessive colored contact lens. It has her promoting sex, wearing less clothing and dressing provocatively, yet designed to be treated as a virtuous woman. It is more than clear that many have long lost their divine mind and are in the mindset of other than self and kind. Their dignity have been almost entirely stripped away, and they fail to see that evil, lust, sex, and explicitness has become the laws of this land. And by allowing herself to be seduced by its delicacy, she severs her divinity. When you relax, flat iron, blow dry, or use so-called natural straightening agents to alter your natural hair texture, do you know what you're saying about yourself? What you are expressing is looking like your ancient ancestors is ugly. Many people have deep-seated underlying sentiments about beauty that burst out into frivolous, widespread views, such as, if you're not appropriately mixed, you're not beautiful. Or if your hair on your head is not wavy or straight, then it's not beautiful. We must learn to appreciate our natural beauty and embrace it in every respect. The uniqueness in our nose, lips, complexion, and our hair must be accepted, but only with the right knowledge can this be truly achieved. Ironically, beyond the mental obstacle that blocks one's visual perception, there's a beauty trend today that whites have subtly reinforced. A beauty that is naturally yours, for they recognize that true beauty is incarnated in the physical likeness of black people. If this were not true, then why would they get lip enhancement injections to have full lips like you? Why would they tan their skin via machines to have a darker hue like you? Why would they curl their hair so that theirs can appear with life like you? Black in all its hues is truly beautiful. Do not be fooled. There's nothing artificial about being beautiful. Beauty is not man-made. It's natural. Now, as you look around, you'll notice that some black women do embrace their natural hair, while others still refuse. Why is that? I have learned that black women who embrace what nature gave them were a preview to an environment that helped them to enjoy a more meaningful existence. These types of environments that help to embrace rather than shun natural beauty drives one to realize the potentiality of their unique endowment that is coded in their genetic instructions. It is going against our genetic instructions where identity crisis develops. Black women who refuse or reject what nature gave them are ignorant because they have no desire for what they feel no want. We are a confluence of genetics that goes back trillions of years. Your genes are a program of instructions that determines your characteristics. With that being said, whenever there is an unnatural shift in the race's natural development, some can cope with the change and others perish. Darwinism calls it survival of the fittest. Regrettably, there were a myriad of reasons to corrupt Black women's reason and power of observation. Nevertheless, the bigger picture is far from what meets the eye. It is the imperceptible forces that have the greatest impact on their mindsets. Such forces have to do with the aftermath of the kidnapping, which is wrongfully called slavery. The use of the word slavery to describe mass, deliberate, and systematic destructions of an entire race not only deflect attention away from the prevalence of cruelty, but it further allows the world to ignore the international crime committed against Black people. With that being said, it must become clear in your mind that we were never slaves. Our golden story goes far beyond that cruel period in time, and the evidence are on the walls and in the structures that we built in Africa and abroad centuries prior. For Africa is not our only homeland. This whole planet belongs to us, and we shared it with all others who seem to have forgotten that. In the time of the kidnapping, we were victims of a system incurably evil that is still prevalent today. The word slave was adopted by a Union sociologist of North America, United States, from the term Slavic. This is the very weapon the kidnappers coined to steal our birthright, identity, and achievements. The hardship that our ancestors endured was called kidnapping. They were illegally abducted by force, taken from one place to another, kept as captive, forced to labor, and tortured in the process. Nowhere has history recorded any more bestial and ruthless human carnage than that of the white people's oppression of Black people. This inhumane incident that persisted for hundreds of years has reprogrammed the entire Nubian race and has thus laid the foundation for us to commit the ultimate transgression, which is the betrayal of oneself and kind. The hardship that this wretchedness imposed was extremely cruel, varying from hideous injustice as in the case of unnecessary murders, lynching, castration, rape, branding, torture, flogging, experimentation, the pillaging of our native lands, and the forced separation of family members to an endless series of inescapable afflictions, all of which was done to destroy all traces of moral fiber left in our genes. Such merciless acts have transformed us indefinitely ever since, making us ripen for the mental social enslavement that is still prevalent in society to this very day. Persistent interbreeding has caused a great deal of genetic pollution in our DNA, leading to unnatural characteristics such as the unhealthy obsession with other races' physical appearance. This then led to the ridiculous verbalization uttered by some Blacks who are always claiming what they are partly mixed with, rather than embracing who they truly are. Because it does not matter how much Asian, East Indian, or Indo-European blood you may think you have running through your veins, you are still an African, and you will be treated as such. For the African genes is scientifically more dominant than any other race on Earth. It is morally impossible to proclaim that you love being Black when so many of you do everything in your power to look other than self and kind. Something is seriously wrong with this picture. There's an obvious lack of self-awareness. You seldom realize that your outer expression is an affirmation of the inner you, projected in a way that confirms the way you perceive yourself. Your perception becomes reality. Each of you watching this video has a perception of yourself that you have created over the years. This character that each of you have created are usually in the realm of what's called your Trinity personality. Most are unaware of these personalities, therefore many do not know who they are. For this reason, people often create a distance between themselves and others by simply editing themselves, revealing only what they want others to see, discarding and changing their true self. This, however, is a misrepresentation of who you are. Now, If what you reflect misrepresent who you are inside your own opinion of yourself, you will not be comfortable with your image no matter what you do. For it is a total disconnection between what's inside and what's outside. Most individuals ignore this reality. When you wear your natural hair, it sets a firm tone regarding your sense of identity. And if you feel secure about it, there will be little or no anxiety. A feeling of satisfaction will derive from your achievement from a unique quality that is widely admired. When you wear your natural hair proudly, you are saying to the world, "This is me. Take me as I am." Now, what if you don't say that? Does it mean you are hiding something? Does it mean you are not comfortable with yourself? In order to answer these questions accurately, we must first examine each individual female. Here's a simple analytical approach that can be used as a measuring rod. Let's say that a black woman is confronted with this truth and acknowledges it as such, yet persistently alters herself afterwards. The answer undoubtedly is yes. She is very much aware of her uncomfortability with her natural self, yet does not want to come to terms with this reality. She then lives in her own unreality. On the contrary, there are others who relax their hair and appear to be very comfortable with the notion even after being told the truth, insofar as to convince the onlooker that they are one with their inner self. These few seem to almost be unaffected by the truth and stand firm in their conviction to switch hair texture as they please in the name of style, primarily because they have formed mental deflectors in their minds, which actively redirect their immediate attention away from the greater issue at hand, which is that of an identity crisis. This form of neurosis is called presumptuous denial. Presumptuous denial is the thoughtless overconfidence in doing something that is obviously wrong while denying obvious errors. Such people, instead of making progress along life's path, remain stuck in the mirror of his or her own creation, living in a world of make-believe. Nothing, and I mean nothing, can help such an individual who deliberately shut their eyes against the truth. These types of individuals are stuck in a suspended state of profound ignorance. Reassurance for change may only occur when they wake up and acknowledge the fact that there is a problem that lies deep in their subconscious mind. If one does not realize their inner self, they will always identify with the ego and revolt against sound right reasoning, denying obvious faults and defects, and is simply a new program. So, how do you realize the inner self? There are various methods that can be used to realize your inner self, and all are based on the removal of limiting ideas in regards to oneself and the outside world. And what I mean is, by finding out what a thing is not like, you can move towards an understanding of what it is like. Through this process, you can approach real happiness by realizing that it does not lie in anything of worldly pursuit. Through negation of everything that can be known through the senses, you exhaust the mental modifications and find the answers within. Ultimately, personal experience is necessary, for it is not a matter of intellectual overstanding. The real you that is often referred to as the self is your essential nature. It is neither your body nor your senses. Your body and your senses are but external qualities of the self. To find your inner self, you must negate identification with all things of the world that is not real. You can begin by self-introspecting and simply say to yourself in private, "I am not this personality. I am not these desires, and I am not these fears," until eventually all things within worldly experiences are negated and nothing remains but the true self. Through this process, union with the true you remains, and from then on, you must observe the plays of life as though you were watching a movie. But do not identify with it. Your reaction to life irritable situations that arise from then on should be, "I am not involved. I am only watching it happen." This entails close awareness of the activities of the mind, which does not want to be watched. Now, since the mind does not want to be watched, it tends to deceive and persuade the individual to stop watching it by directing its attention elsewhere. But you must observe this with patience, taking care not to fight the mind, but to gently guide it. If you were to examine your consciousness regarding yourself, you would have to turn your attention inward upon the self dwelling within. Inside the mind of every individual watching, there's a triad principle called me, myself, and I. The me is the principle of becoming. It represents the student doctrine of the self. Myself is the principle of cooperation. It represents the servant doctrine of the self. And the I is the principle of being. It represents the master doctrine of the self. Although the triad principle, me, myself, and I, are similar in kind, they are different in degrees. The tendency of the student doctrine is always in the direction of receiving impressions, while the tendency of the master doctrine is always in the direction of giving out or expressing. And in the direction of myself is always serving. The person who can give continuous attention and thought to a subject actively employs all of the mental doctrines. The student doctrine in the work of actively generating new thoughts, concepts, and ideas, and the master's will in stimulating and energizing the creative portion while the servant utilizes the mind. Unfortunately, however, majority of people rarely employ the master doctrine and are content to live according to the thoughts and ideas instilled into them from others mentally stronger than themselves. So, you might want to know just how to utilize the master doctrine of the mind. Well, the normal method is for you to allow the master and the student doctrine within your mind to coordinate and act harmoniously in conjunction with each other. Because without the active support of the will of the master doctrine, the student doctrine and the servant doctrine is likely to rest content with mental impressions received from outside influences. With that being said, you must learn to study yourself by examining your feelings, thoughts, and motives. You do this by simply deciphering what are yours as opposed to other people's view on your hair. Stand firm in your will to do what you know is right, and do not be influenced by the furnished misconceptions of the majority. Allow me to expound on what the great master teacher and scholar Tahuti of ancient Tamare or Egypt referred to as the Trinity personality. The Trinity personality are the three characteristics or qualities that forms an individual's distinctive character, which consists of 1. Who you think you are, 2. Who others think you are, and 3. Who you really are. Take a few seconds to view these concentric circles. At the outer ring is who others think you are. The middle ring is what you think you are. And at the very center is who you really are. 1. What others think you are. These are the people you pass on the street, close friends, employees, and family. Do you care what they think about your hair in its natural state? 2. What you think. Is what you think of your hair based on the people who influence you to think so? 3. The real you. How do you really feel about seeing yourself natural again? Through this method, you can clearly evaluate your own reaction to the opinions of others. Keep in mind that everyone will always have a different reaction to your natural hair. And like most people, you will be driven to weigh their reaction according to their importance to you. Surely, everyone will evaluate this differently because this is a personal assessment. Always remember that you can lie to all others, but to yourself you will always reveal the truth. One of the first steps into becoming your natural self again is coming to terms with how much you care about what other people think. Now, let's say other people's opinions are not a part of the equation. What then is it that makes you feel unsure about going natural? You are getting in touch with the real you. For going natural is a process where you will have the time needed to adjust in order to explore your inner feelings as it is an emotional transition. This is what the inner you deals with on a daily basis. But why? It has much to do with your fear of change and what you think is comfortable. It has much to do with whether or not you see yourself for who you really are and not what you've been trained to be. The reality is, being natural is what you've always been, but you insist on remaining incognito because of the long-term negative conditioning. Now, you struggle in intense contemplation with the thought of becoming yourself, and the additive insult of it all is the dubious stories of the unmanageability of your natural hair. It is very serious when you think about it. Therefore, I encourage you not to think, but only to reason. For to think is to have an opinion, whereas to reason is to walk through the threshold of thinking and administer logic. With that being said, know who you are and care less about what others think. For he or she who merely think does not know a thing about who you are by nature. The inherent essential quality of who you are is for each of you viewing this video to uncover and come to terms with yourself. So what does slavery really have to do with black women's hair, you may ask? It has everything to do with their hair. You see, although often disregarded, like I said before, the past has a tremendous effect on the outcome of the future. And those who do not know their past are bound to repeat it. When blacks were kidnapped, they suffered from a lack of self-worth and were victims of a society that labeled them as inferior. Because of this, many see themselves as the subordinate race. This lack of self-esteem can often lead to self-contempt, for the mind is a powerful tool, and whatever we believe ourselves to be is what we become. Those who have been oppressed look at themselves through the eyes of their oppressor. This way of thinking is regrettably passed from one generation to the next through concentrated subliminal destruction. Ever since slavery, black people have inherited an inferiority complexity, overt self-hate tendencies, and automatic social condemnation. They suffer greatly today for what happened in the past, and they are utterly reluctant to realize how it has affected them spiritually, physically, and emotionally. Although they are not directly aware of its impact, it has plagued their minds and has thus led them to have an unhealthy obsession with other races' physical characteristics. During slavery, our ancestors' distinctive hair was either shaved, covered, and most times never tended to with care. They were far too preoccupied with the master's work to even consider properly grooming themselves. When slavery allegedly ended, voting and openly speaking their minds was not permissible. Fear dictated their every action, especially in how they expressed themselves, for they were physically free but mentally confined, and never given the liberty to control their own destiny. You see, true freedom for a race is having the privilege and power to make its own laws, and thereby govern itself in kind accordingly. We can never be truly free in a system that was never created with our best interests in mind. Such a system would only benefit those who created it and their descendants. The horrible stories of atrocity dealt upon my people in time of slavery were well felt, taught, and heard. Racial prejudice, rape, whipping, mutilation, and murder were remembered as a commonplace event. Unfortunately, such nightmarish memories were unavoidable and were thus burnt deep within their minds. It was hard to forget such harsh realities, so they began living in their own unreality, raising their children to be subservient to their oppressor for their safety. After the physical captivity had ended, the mental sedation continued. When money was needed to facilitate needs, since they were already reduced to the position of a servant, they were thoroughly convinced that the only way they could make ends meet was by working for their former slave master, whose door was readily open for their eventual return. But where would they go when slavery just ended? While on duty, there was always a Euro-approved appearance that they were required to maintain. If you were a woman, your hair had to be straightened, covered or pulled back, and if you were a man, it simply had to be cut. The woolly hair just had to go. In these modern times, racial discrimination is still prevalent in the deodorized prejudice workplace. This clandestine phenomenon is ever at play. I still encounter the uneasiness of some whites who see me with my natural woolly crown for the very first time, and the many I've often crossed paths with. It is as if they have never seen a black person before. I could almost hear their inner thoughts as they inhibit themselves from their natural relentless course of action. My experience gave validity to the words uttered by the renowned comedian Paul Mooney, may he rest in peace, where he stated,
"When your hair is relaxed, white people are relaxed. Because when your hair is nappy, they're not happy."
In order to fit the mold of society, black people took on the lifestyle of others who were already influenced by whites in the United States of America. After being deprived of every right that is free to all human beings by nature, we conducted peaceful demonstrations that often left us in the hospital or in jail. After much televised discrimination and brutal force used upon my peaceful, gentle people, the whites sought to change the laws and integrate with us. Now, at first glance, it seemed to be an act of benevolence, but soon it's shown to be only a distinction without a difference. Our willingness to tolerate a horrid situation blinded us from seeing that integration was a farce and cruel hoax perpetuated on us in time of our ignorance. Integration infected us with the feeling of kinship with the enemy, and thus drain our power of resistance. Integration was the instrument used to further destroy our people. Although it may sound agreeable, this pretended integration only helped to keep blacks mentally and economically dependent on white folks. Integration also led to miscegenation, or missing genes of a nation, which then led to genetic cultural infiltration. Through this pretended integration, we were conditioned to live under every system except for one governed by our own. We no longer realized that we were one people afflicted under the same oppressor. We wanted to be accepted by those who victimized us so much that instead of liberating self and kind, our primary concern was assimilation. It seems the urge to escape our real self is also an urge to escape the rational and the obvious. So, what is genetic cultural infiltration? Well, since they can make up words, I presume that we can too. Genetic cultural infiltration is the process by which a predominantly recessive parasitic organism intentionally infiltrates the gene pool of a dominant organism for the purpose of benefiting by obtaining genetic inheritance at the host's expense. This then creates genetic mutation in the host, which is then passed on to its offspring. This serious instance of genetic corruption strongly influences the cultural feature, causing considerable damage and temporary loss of identity to the dominant organism. To express it differently, when the whites were raping blacks during the so-called slavery, it incapacitated the DNA, which eventually passed on to the offspring. The consequences of this unlawful mixing destroyed the identity of our race indefinitely. It distorted black consciousness, producing a people who were now programmed to assimilate to the characteristics of their oppressor. It led to children being born with brown skin complexion who had a tendency to use chemicals to lighten their hereditary skin tone. It led to blacks being used as ventriloquist dummies to help maintain white supremacy and not even know it. It led to quarrels amongst us, the oppressed, about whose complexion is better. It led to blacks altering their cotton-textured hair for no reason known to themselves, but the fact that an aspect of their genes is in fact Caucasian in nature, which hates that very texture. It led to disease and sicknesses that we never had. It led to intransigent opposition to the idea of black unity because the infected possessed conflicted genes that made them see racial unity as a form of racial prejudice. What do I mean by cotton texture hair? One of the first crops the kidnappers deliberately forced black people to pick was cotton. The psychology behind picking cotton was to encourage us to hate our hair. The fact that our hair texture was so similar to cotton made us want to get rid of it by any means necessary. And as a result, we began conking it, frying it, cutting it, and chemically altering it. We did just about anything to get away from that cotton texture hair, not realizing that our hair was not only a sign of our originality, but it was also a natural crown that symbolized royalty. Since our hair was labeled everything negative from kinky, coarse, brittle, dry, hard, nappy, knotty, wiry, ugly, unmanageable, in time we learned to internalize these false interpretations. We especially use these terms when we're exceedingly displeased with one another. It was more than apparent that we disliked the texture of our hair and we desired to have hair like all others. The chief burden of our frustration was the conscientiousness of an ineffectual self, and our chief desire was to get rid of the unwanted self by finding a new identity, a feat that can only be met through imitation, which led to alteration. It seemed the less satisfaction we derived from being ourselves, the greater our desire were to be like all others. Violence was just one of the ways of maintaining the racial hierarchy. Newspapers, film, theater stereotyped us as simple-minded figures of fun. They then sought to administer the coup de grace with the minstrel shows in the early 1830s.
Oh, I'm gone, yes, I'm gone, with the love that's ever growing to the cold black man be mine.
Who would have known that this wicked act would have emerged as an established form the next decade? The minstrel shows was a Euro-American entertainment consisting of comedic skits, dancing, and music performed by white people in painted black faces. This is primarily the reason why people's antipathy to dark-skinned people is much greater in general. These minstrel shows mercilessly parodied black people as ignorant, lazy, slothful, irrational, and superstitious. In 1848, These blackface minstrel shows were the national so-called art of its time. It survived as a professional entertainment until about 1910, yet amateur performance continued until the 1960s in high schools and local theaters. Regrettably, after the Civil War, some black performers actually applied minstrel makeup to caricature themselves as shuffling Negroes, reinforcing a sense of superiority amongst white audiences. These shows were aired on national television networks such as NBC. It was practically a central feature of entertainment in the United States of America. The minstrels were influential, and it essentially shaped assumptions about us, and it have above all bred the belief that dark skin complexion was not beautiful. It made us know that we were outside the pale of civilization. We were attacked, ridiculed, and made to look like incompetent buffoons. It denied us human capacity. Everywhere you look, we were reduced to silly childlike characters that needed to be trained. The humiliation and violence inflicted upon us soon matured in our minds, and we further altered ourselves. Subsequent to the years of persecution carried out against us, our strong moral values that we once possessed were slowly dwindling into insignificance. We were eager to please and interbreed with other races for physical gratification, relying on the idea that our children would inherit some of the recessive traits that were objectively seen as the ideal for beauty. The seed planted for self-hatred was growing, and it blossomed into strange concepts such as good hair and bad hair, as if hair had a behavioral problem. Repetitively over the years, woolly hair has maliciously received bad propaganda. When a black woman used a hot comb to alter her hair and her children's hair at the risk of minor burns and damage to the scalp and follicles, it wasn't because she thought her natural hair was beautiful. Over time, her rejected self soon ceased to assert its claims to distinctiveness, and there is nothing to resist the propensity to copy. She becomes thoroughly convinced that her hair is ugly, and soon she expresses it proudly through her public persona. So, how did this affect young black females? Young black females naturally view themselves in a positive light. From the moment they put on that first dress and view themselves in the mirror, they immediately fall in love with their very reflection. But woe to the purity of these poor girls, whose conditional mold as adults exclude them from the effortless beauty of their youth. They change considerably for the reason that they become increasingly aware of the prevailing standards of beauty and of others' reaction to their parents around them. You see, our children go outside and they see white people ruling, and they have everything. So they are thoroughly convinced that the only thing for them to do is to serve them and assimilate their characteristics. This is white supremacy in its most rootless form. Your daughters become increasingly aware of comments that are made about them. They start to define themselves in terms of the way they are perceived physically. By young adulthood, they've acquired labels: the pretty one, the one with good hair, the one with pretty eyes, or statements from their male counterparts like, "You're pretty for a dark-skinned girl." These words become internalized, and these young females become complicit in allowing it to reduce their uniqueness. Negative comments about their appearance often stay with them, and sometimes even scar them for life. This is the judgment of a harsh world, and even worse, the judgment each inflict upon themselves mires one into self-contempt. As a result, these women wall off their childlike beauty from the outside world because this shields them from the critics. However, when they do this, they eventually find themselves in a box on passive displays to a world that rates people by its objective standards of external beauty, which is unhealthy for the mind. If you were to ask a few black women to close their eyes and reflect back to the effortless beauty of their youth, natural beauty in all its glory, ask them to remember how much they appreciated at the time. If they're honest, they would notice that they weren't so fixated on societal standards of beauty because they already knew that they were beautiful. Of course, there are those who do not share the same sentiments. Unfortunately for many, during their personal grooming session as children, they've learned just how tender their heads were. You see, when a mother puts a comb through her child's woolly hair that has not been moisturized, it's torturous. This negative perception of combing her hair because of her experience to the pain felt links to her memory. Thus, the effortless beauty of these women's youth will naturally be vague, for there's no positive perception for them to relate to but pain. So, do black women really know why they relax their hair? Many would assert that they relax their hair in order for it to be soft and manageable, but this is only a societal circulating sentiment. The truth is, most of these women do not have a clue to why they really relax it. Their inability or unwillingness to see things as they are promotes gullibility. For this reason, they often think that it is what they're supposed to do. It is like a rite of passage for womanhood. Surprisingly enough, even black women with wavy and curly textured hair like our Latino family relaxes it at some point in their life as well. The truth is, those who work in advertising are masters of persuasion. They subtly weave their images and slogans into our daily lives, knowing that we will register so much unconsciously. Then you walk into a beauty supply store and feel a sense of familiarity with hair products that you think you never heard of. Millions of dollars a year is spent on advertising. It is brilliantly calculated and majority fall for it. This new generation of young black women have shown up at a later time, and their hair relaxes, hot combs, blow dries, and many other chemical products that have been proven to damage hair beyond recognition are just there on a store shelf as if they magically appeared. And no matter how healthy one may think their hair may look straightened, it definitely is not. Due to the lack of self-knowledge, this generation of young black women fail to realize that relaxing their hair is not normal. Societal acceptance and years of unfavorable conditioning have blinded them to the importance of their health as it pertains to harsh chemicals placed on their hair and scalp. The widespread view of relaxed hair being normal is grounds for a series of negative reoccurring events that will continue until right knowledge of this obvious error is addressed. Surely this act of pure ignorance is not entirely their fault, for they were born in a system of deceit where naturally woolly hair is so scarce that when they see it on another, they are almost inherently driven to make underhand statements like, "You need a perm," as if underneath their creative facade, they don't have the same hair texture. Another interesting fact that must be considered is young black women never had a firm choice in choosing between a relaxer and their natural, primarily because many parents were already conditioned to follow the self-hating patterns of modern society. I witnessed firsthand when a childhood friend of mine decided to make the transition from straightened to natural hair, and I watched how her own mother, along with members of her family, including common friends, attacked her with statements like, "You're not keeping your hair up," when in reality, our hair grows up. Thus, we can only naturally keep it up. Altering natural hair for shoulder-length fur is in fact keeping it down. This is the beginning of the inferiority complex that is ignorantly instilled by black parents. How did black parents instill inferiority complexity into their children? As I stated before, most black parents were conditioned in a conformity-based society in which they felt compelled to impose on their children. It all starts in a household where the mother usually has her hair relaxed, long before a child is ever conceived. When a child is brought into this setting, its mother is the subliminal conditioner. As they get older and step outside the household, they begin to notice that black females of all age groups also relax their hair. This then gives them the incentive to partake in this socialization of society. Many parents rarely give thought to the fact that conforming causes serious harm to the mind of a child, for in youth is the stage in which a child can be molded. Since hair is always associated with beauty, if parents reduce the quality of their children's natural hair to reflect traits of another race, they inadvertently teach them that woolly hair is not beautiful. These children will then revere other than their own hair texture, which is breeding grounds for inferiority, complexity. How a child views themselves is the sole responsibility of the parents, especially when they're still in the household. Unfortunately, many parents are victims of the same inferiority complexity instilled into them by their parents and their parents, and so forth. It's a vicious cycle of feeling inadequate, which leads to alteration for comfort. Children are unfortunately born into this setting. The image that follows is a vivid example of how parents can implant the seed for inferiority complexity in their children. Here, we have a young black girl with her natural crown, yet she admires a black woman with relaxed hair. Soon this fragile mind little girl will become older and feel the necessity to partake in this socialization of womanhood. The caption reads, "Made for both of us, made for American living," and that caption couldn't be any clearer. Mothers are the first object of beauty for their children. If the mother surrenders her natural beauty for someone else's, then the daughters will follow suit. After all, as a child, you trust that your mother only wants the best for you, and she does. But regrettably, these mothers were not given the best lessons of life themselves. Therefore, they being heavily misguided can only be successful in misguiding their offspring. A picture image is a direct link between representation and choice we make in our lives. The propensity to expunge and suppress all traces of Black consciousness in our children's mind has been aggregated through images. Since there are not enough images of Black women in their natural state, the whites monopolize on this reality and relentlessly project Eurocentric images which implicitly regards them as preeminent. These images that our children see have a huge impact on them. It influences their lives and affects not only the way they think of other races, but how they view themselves in the process. Black children need to see more images of woolly-haired people in all areas of society, for it goes a long way. What can parents do to help their children? Parents must not make the mistake of giving their children lip confessions, unaided by action. They must be a living example of the truth. Give your children praise, but not just by praising them. Read to them about the greatness of their culture. Show them the evidence of Nubian, Black presence being the key to all civilization. Eradicate all negative beliefs that have been injected into their hearts and minds and instill Unwap or Wusabat, which is simply right knowledge, which are the facts of life, their true culture. Television use should be limited and supervised when in use. They should only watch mentally uplifting and morally educational programs. The music they listen to should also be positively uplifting and in tune with their biological tones. It is the parents' responsibility to give their children a sense of self-value, especially when they are young, because they watch everything you do, and such values stay with them on to adulthood. Keep in mind that this can only be accomplished if the parents model self-esteem and self-acceptance for the right reason. Then the children will follow suit. If the parents are happy with their image, the children will know just from their appearance, as opposed to parents who are constantly altering something about themselves. Parents also have to be socially aware of the time that they live in. They must realize that this world that we live in is built against our children, and as long as we fail to collectively build a constructive environment for them, we risk the possibility of losing them. We must live for the advancement of their future. If for no other reason, do it because we were once children ourselves. And always remember and never forget that all Black children are all of our children. Therefore, we collectively should help raise them collectively. You understand? We are one tribe of people from the same root seed, no matter where you are geographically located. What did Black men do to their hair? As quietly kept, many Black men suffer from the same complexity as their female counterparts. Hard to notice it because relaxing woolly hair has become so peculiar to women that whenever the topic presents itself, men will point to them as if they are the only ones with hair issues. Most Black men don't even appreciate the dark-skinned complexion of women in their own race, much less one with woolly hair. Let's be honest, natural woolly hair worn by Black men are just as scarce as it is on Black women. In most cases, if you see a Black man with a natural, he's more than likely en route to get it braided, which is not a problem. I'm just pointing out a fact. The Black hair journey for men all started with the conch. The conch was a hairstyle popular amongst Black men from the 1920s to the 1960s. The word conch means to break down, to become exhausted, give up, faint, or die, or blow to the head. This definition alone should have made them refuse to wear this hairstyle. The conch was originally a Caucasoid woman's hairstyle with the hair in a high turn back and roll round the face look. This style was popularly known as the pompadour, named after Madame de Pompadour, mistress of Louis XV of France in 1721. Other Black men chose to simply slick back their straightened hair, and in order to maintain this look, they wore do-rags and hair wraps that were usually seen on women. Like the modern-day hair relaxer, this style required repeated application, a special type of lotion or cream containing strong alkaline and sometimes pure lye to keep up this pure lye. The conch was very popular amongst Black men in the early 1920s. Richard Berry, Muddy Waters, Little Richard, James Brown, and members of groups like The Temptation and The Miracles were of the many who wore this style. This hairstyle eventually fell out of popularity with the emergence of the Black Panther Party movement in the 1960s, at which time the wearing of our natural woolly crown was readily accepted, for it became a symbol of racial pride. This eventually ended by the 1980s, when musical extraordinaires like Michael Jackson and Smokey Robinson began the trend of sporting jerry curls. Today, the conch and the jerry curls have died out amongst most black men. Unfortunately, however, there are a few who still partake in this hairstyle. The problem with history is that it tends to repeat itself. Black men then began sporting the crew cut, which is another Caucasoid hairstyle, mostly affiliated with the armed force of the 1950s in the United States during World War II, at which time we were met with much opposition in regards to equality. But this did not discourage us from sporting the oppressor's hairstyle. We then began wearing the Caesar cut. This was a short horizontal straight cut fringe where the fur is layered to around 1 to 2 inches all over. This style was named after Julius Caesar, Roman general, dictator, and statesman, whose career irreversibly changed the course of Greco-Roman history. Today, the Caesar haircut is still very much popular amongst black men. It is considered the grown man look, the professional look. The Caesar style is also to counteract the natural look amongst black men. This is why they brought it back. Black men then decided to wave their hair. Now, although we have men amongst our race who have inherited wavy hair through interbreeding, we also have those with woolly hair texture who uses chemical products like the wave kit and texturizers, which contain straightening agents like that of hair relaxers in order to alter their hair texture. What about the men who don't like the natural look? If you are a woman that is prepared for the transition, do not allow a man to keep you in a state of make-believe. For every man who has his doubts about natural woolly hair, there's another one who thinks it's gorgeous. There are men out there who love it and wouldn't want you any other way because they see you as more attractive than ever. So be confident and competent in the way you carry yourself with your natural crown, and you will attract the right man for you. Natural woolly hair sends a maturity signal, for it immediately tells the world that you are conscious of who you are and is comfortable with whom you see in the mirror. This, however, is only the perception, for you cannot totally judge someone based on appearances alone. Conversing is usually necessary in order to know whether or not the outer beauty links with the inner. Ladies, if your man cannot accept you as your natural self, or if he does not see you as beautiful with your natural hair, then that man is not for you. You need a man who thinks and reasons along the lines of his own genetic code. A man who accepts the uniqueness in the women of his own race. Do not settle for a man with a self-hate complex, for you would only produce offsprings with the same complexity. What should one expect when going natural? When transitioning to natural hair, negative thoughts about your woolly hair will attack you double the force. This is the natural law of resistance where your mind will fight you, for it does not like change. You must replace these negative thoughts as soon as they arrive with positive ones, for ill thoughts cannot stand before good thoughts. The very fact that undesirable thoughts about your hair creates a feeling of uneasiness indicates growth, for at one time these thoughts were welcomed into the mind. Know that negative thoughts about your woolly hair cannot be driven out forcefully. They will fade away of their own accord when you persist in your transition with tenacity and diligence. You must be mindful of the twist of fate that can occur if you allow negative thoughts to settle in, for if they subside, you would find yourself in a salon relaxing your hair double the force. And by then, you will be too self-willed and self-satisfied to even care to see your own errors. Infatuation and attachment to societal hair standards is a serious obstacle to overcome. The greater the attachment, the greater the pain of losing an identity that you never really possess. Always remember that going natural is one thing, but staying natural should be the ultimate goal. When making the transition, disorientation and facing the real you may be startling because you have been an other than your own image for such a long time that the natural you became a stranger. Now, although it's you, it's not the you you've grown content with seeing in the mirror. You may feel that you are becoming a different person, for you are in one respect, but the real you will always remain. Be very patient, for transitioning will not happen overnight. It is a progressive process which takes time, that is readily needed to adjust and to explore your personal feelings. Know that your confidence may be at an all-time low, and every day all of the stories of natural hair being unmanageable, dry, and hard to manage will persist in your mind. This is what the inner you will be dealing with. When these types of discouragements creep up on many, they are apt to give up on their motive for transitioning. This, however, is a great mistake. It must be remembered that there will always be periods when your progress is more or less apparent. Perseverance is the key. Know your reason, know your fears, and know your reaction to what others may think and say. Understand that the more right knowledge you obtain about your hair, the best to transitioning for your lifestyle. Always remember that transitioning is more so mental rather than physical. Nothing acts without the permission of the mind. Therefore, you must purify the mind first. The most profoundly transformative passage of a Black woman's life is her opportunity to reclaim her birthright, beauty in its most timeless form. Be ever mindful that some people's attitude about your change can be harsh while others can be uplifting. Transitioning can be very disturbing. Some people may say tempering things, and on the other hand, there will be people who see your natural state as a form of self-awareness. Now, no matter the outer reaction, be prepared for them all. You're going through the change, one of the most important changes to your appearance. Therefore, you have to be prepared for the emotional swings and the personal reassessment that accompanies it. Take heed to the fact that your appearance ties into your self-esteem. Therefore, whenever doubt arises, you should seek the company of naturally elevated women and remain under their influence for some time. Conversing with women of firm and clear reasoning for their transition will clear all doubts. When you reach the stage where you're finally comfortable with the real you, you'll probably notice the irony of how everyone tells you how wonderful your hair looks. But the absurdity of it all is those who tell you this would most likely be Black women with relaxed hair. Soon you'll hear statements like, "I love your hair. I would do it, but..." You could fill in the blank with so many illogical reasons. But my hair is too hard. But I don't think it would go over at my job. But I don't know if my hair would come in like yours. But. I promise you, when you are finally comfortable with being you, you are going to get reinforcement from those closest to you, and even strangers. We all need a little nourishment from time to time, and when we get it, it's mind-blowing, for it confirms what you've done, and it also confirms your own opinion of yourself. Nothing is more valuable. And last, but definitely not least, always remember, if you were beautiful before the transition, you'll still be beautiful after it. If you were attractive before, you'll still be attractive after. If you were pleasurable to be around, you'll still be pleasurable to be around. Just keep a positive attitude about your life and about yourself. I'm Kev Ray, and this is Back to the Basic. Like, share, and subscribe. And don't forget to hit that notification bell. Peace and love. Facts we stated. You wanna know something? Go back to basics. Most saw a trap and was called the Matrix. The world frivolized, yet it's hard to face it. So I spread truth, hope you embrace it. Watch, like, share, bring in awareness. We born to be woken, this the awakening. Said we born to be woken, this the awakening. I'm fearless.